there.
Hey.
Hello.
My name's Reese Adler. Probably thinking who in the devil is she. I actually have a book coming out from Schiffer Publishing next year, which will be a collection of Maryland's Western Shore haunts. You're probably thinking, okay, what is this person from Maryland doing out here in Ohio to talk about Maryland? Maryland is a small state, and it tends to get overlooked on the paranormal map quite a bit. We're from Baltimore, and it took us maybe 8 hours to get here. So we're not too far away. I mean, we're within a reasonable amount of drive. So I just kind of want to go over and just, say, hey, look, if you're interested in ghost hunting and you're looking for some place to go other than what's local or in Ohio or Kentucky and Indiana, we actually have a lot to offer in Maryland. Obviously, I can't go over everything. We'd be here actually for several hours because there is quite a bit. But I'm going to touch on a few things, mainly on the Western Shore, but a couple things over on the Eastern Shore as well. When you think of Maryland, there's a few things that come to mind. Usually the Orioles, even though it's not the best team in the world, we still have it. We've got the Ravens. Yeah. The crabs. Everybody knows about our Chesapeake Bay and our crabs. Of course, Cal Ripken. That's probably the only reason why a lot of people would come from out of state to see the Orioles for several years. Some of the other things that come to mind, too, is Baltimore's Inner Harbor, which is absolutely beautiful, and there's a lot of neat things there. We've got the Naval Academy in Annapolis, which is dear to my heart. I grew up in Annapolis. We also have TV shows like The Wire, which doesn't really portray Baltimore all that great. It's drug dealers and killings, and Homicide was shot there in the 90s, which is kind of the same thing, but, it still puts us on the TV shows. And we've had several different movies shot there, like Ladder 49, the last Die Hard movie, Enemy of the State. We've had quite a few things shot there. Now, the question is, do you know that Maryland is the birthplace of Babe Ruth? He was actually born in Baltimore, and there's a museum to him. It's also home to John Waters. If anybody's ever seen the movie Hairspray, which is probably the biggest thing he's known for, that is one of his things. He's done a lot of other movies. Most of them have been kind of underground, but that's his big claim to fame. And it was also turned into a play on Broadway. The Ouija board was invented in Baltimore. Parker Brothers sells it now, but that's where it originated from. Also, the birthplace of the umbrella was first made there. And in fact, the logo or the motto when it first came out was born in Baltimore, raised everywhere. Some other things about Maryland. We have Concord Point Lighthouse, which is the oldest continuously operated lighthouse in Maryland. We have a lot of lighthouses because of the bay. We also have the Maryland Gazette, which I used to write for, which is the oldest continuously published paper in the country. That began in 1727. There's a lot of papers out there that say they're the oldest, but they haven't published continuously over that time. As of right now, it has never stopped publishing. The B&O Railroad. They built the first railroad station outside of Baltimore. And Ben Stein. I don't know if you've seen Ben Stein Money or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but Ben Stein was born in Maryland. So, we have a couple little niches here and there. One of the first places I'm going to talk about is the Admiral Fell Inn. The Admiral Fell Inn is in an area of Baltimore called Fells Point, which has a ton of history. William Fell was a Quaker from Lancaster, England, and came over and purchased that whole area. And of course, over time, it was developed and everything else. So a lot of the names are names from England. Like one of the streets is Baltimore, we call it Thames, but of course in England they call it Thames. This place is haunted. There's a vague story about a man dying in room 413. It's said that when you go in that room, there's weird feelings, unexplainable breezes, different sounds, different footsteps. In 2003, when Hurricane Isabel came up through, we had a lot of flooding in Baltimore and Annapolis, and they actually went and evacuated the hotel. But a lot of the management stayed behind just to see if they needed to put more sandbags out and things like that. They all were sitting on the first floor, and they had made sure that the entire hotel had been cleared. Well, on the floor above them, it sounded like there was a party going on. They heard laughter, carrying on, lots of footsteps, went upstairs to check it out. There's nothing going on. the kind of little bit of history on that building, in 1726 is when it was first erected. Now, this massive thing you see now, that's over several years of expansion. In 1889, it was opened as a seamen's hostel that was called the Anchorage, and it was by the Women's Auxiliary of the Port Mission. And they were Christian ladies, and what they wanted to do was open up a home for sailors that were coming into Baltimore where there wasn't supposed to be any rowdiness or bringing women back or any of that other stuff. But it happened. In 1929, the YMCA got it and converted it into a place where young men could go and stay. And they referred to it as the doghouse because that's how small the rooms were. The YMCA had it until the 1950s. After that, it was unoccupied from the mid-70s till about 1985 when the current owners bought that and slowly started buying the other buildings on that block and being able to expand it. It's actually a very luxurious hotel now. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's got the right there and everything, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The next place is Antietam National Battlefield.
But still haunted?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yep. Antietam was one of the battles of the Civil War. It was actually the bloodiest single day of battle. It was September 17th, 1862. There was 23,100 men that were either wounded, missing, or died in that one day. So everybody talks about Gettysburg, and Gettysburg, believe me, is haunted. I've been there I don't know how many times, but Antietam has its ghosts as well. And it's actually, about an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes from Gettysburg. One of the haunted places is actually called Bloody Lane, and that's where the Irish Brigade fought. And the story behind that is there was a group of school children from the McDonough School that had gone on a field trip, and a couple of the boys got separated from the rest of the group. And when they finally got caught up with the teacher, they had said that they were hearing what sounded like Deck the Halls being sung. And the teacher was a little confused and thought, okay, well, they're trying to make something up because they got separated. But they kept saying, no, they heard fa la 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 la. Well, upon research, like I said, it's the Irish Brigade. There was a Gaelic saying that they would say, and I believe it's pronounced fa a bala, which means clear the way. And since that time, there's been other reports of people either hearing that or catching it as an EVP on a recorder. Another place that's haunted there in Antietam is the Philip Pry House. And that was actually commandeered by General McClellan as headquarters. Right now it's owned by the National Park Service, so it's not a public building that you can go into, but there's still a lot of reports of hauntings from the Rangers. There was actually a meeting there a few years ago, and I believe it was people kind of like Friends of Antietam that will go in and work with the Park Service to help restore things. There's actually a report here in this last year how somebody found what looked like a groundhog hole, and they looked and there was bones in there, and they go in and they help preserve all of that. But this man and woman, husband and wife, had gone to this meeting, and the wife said, who was the woman I just saw on the stairs? And he said, what are you talking about? Well, there was a woman in old-fashioned clothing, that's how she put it, that actually came down the stairs and then went into another room and disappeared. They're not quite sure who that was. It's believed to be the wife of General Richardson. General Richardson was actually injured with a very bad abdominal wound at the Battle of Antietam, but he didn't die for 6 months. For 6 months, he remained in the Pry House and stayed there and eventually died. And they believe that that's actually her spirit that's there because she came and stayed with him and was extremely distraught, understandably, with her husband dying there. The next place is another place in Fells Point, Bertha's. I don't know if you've ever seen the bumper sticker that says "Eat Bertha's Mussels." That's actually from this restaurant. It's funny. I've gone to places out west and have seen the bumper sticker, which tickles me because I know a lot of people don't know what it means, but it's obviously from Baltimore. Bertha's was a bar called the Lone Star, and it was purchased in 1972 by Tony and Laura Norris. And Tony wanted to buy some things for the bar to kind of decorate it and, give it a little flair. And he came across a stained glass window, and it was in memoriam to a Bertha E. Bartholomew. And he was tickled by it, so he hung it behind the bar, and that's how it's got its name. Nobody has any clue who Bertha Bartholomew is, but that's what it's named after. The haunt that's in there is there's a lady in black that apparently appears on the stairwell. They don't know if she's tied to the building. I mean, most of these buildings were first constructed in the 1700s and then obviously modernized over time. Or if maybe it might be Bertha that's attached to this stained glass window that ended up in there. Another place is in Glen Echo, Maryland, which is actually a Washington, D.C. suburb. It's the Clara Barton House. Clara Barton was the woman that founded the American Red Cross. She moved in February 28th, 1897, and it housed the Red Cross until, I believe, 1904. Originally, she used it just as a warehouse to put different supplies, disaster relief supplies in there. But about 1890, I had it down there. It was about 1890 or so that she actually moved the headquarters for the Red Cross in there and lived there as well. In fact, she died in the house at the age of 90 in 1912. And there's a lot of reports of her being seen in the house and then in the trails behind the house as well. The next place is very near and dear to my heart. I've actually been able to investigate it myself. The Dr. Samuel Mudd House. It's called Beantown. I know it makes you think of Boston, but it's actually a little area of a town called Waldorf, which is in southern Maryland. Dr. Samuel Mudd was the gentleman that treated John Wilkes Booth after he assassinated President Lincoln. And then there's some other places that you'll see in my presentation that have to do with John Wilkes Booth. In a minute. Some of the reports in there, books falling, pictures falling off the walls, footsteps, apparitions, voices. When I had the chance to investigate, we actually had the whole grounds. Now, the Mudd family still owns the house and owns about 90% of the acreage, and it's well over 100 acres that they own. And there's several outbuildings. And we got EVPs in the house. We got EVPs in the outbuildings as well. The outbuildings weren't there at the time that Booth came through. There apparently, years and years later, there was a black child that had been dropped off with the family. And, this was late 1800s, early 1900s. At the time, a white family wasn't going to take a black child into their home. But they weren't going to, leave the child out to starve. So they actually built a little 2-room house that they reared the child in. And he actually lived in there until adulthood. And we've caught EVPs of what we believe is him. In fact, we had a sensitive that was with us, and she's pretty big girl. And she went to sit down, and when she did, she caught an EVP that went, "Fat girl, hee 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 hee," which she cracked up about. She's like, at least I know they have a sense of humor. We actually caught several things. I have some pictures that you'll see after this. I have an EVP that I caught, and it's kind of hard to hear because it's as immediately as I turn the recorder on. Walking through the house, I got somebody very sing-songing me saying, "I see you." So we're going to play it. Hopefully the microphone, if I hold the microphone up to it, might pick it up. It's before they if y'all can hear it or not. Not sure who that was. Don't think it was Dr. Mudd. That to me sounds more female than anything. But Dr. Mudd did make an appearance for us that night. Got a couple pictures. This first one here, this is in the room that John Wilkes Booth slept in. All the furniture in there is original. It was there at the time that Booth came in. In fact, the red couch that he originally laid him on for him to set the leg is still in the parlor downstairs. But we took this picture. This is not one of our investigators. And you can see here, we've kind of tried to blow it up a little bit. It looks like somebody looking down. There's a 4-post bed there with something in their hand. And this here is a rolled up sleeve. It looks like a rolled up linen. I'm not sure who that is. It's somebody with dark hair. I don't know if that's a scalpel, if that's supposed to be a candlestick, or what they have in their hand. But, they appear to be looking down at something. Now, in this room, there's no pictures of Dr. Mudd in there at all. So if we go to the next one, this here, that's the reflection of one of our team members, the back of her head. 3 seconds later, we took another picture. And if you look here, there's a face that showed up. And like I said, there's no pictures of Dr. Mudd anywhere in the house. There's other pictures of him elsewhere. After we got that, we went on the internet into the Smithsonian to find known portraits of Dr. Mudd. And if you look at the next picture, to me, that's Dr. Mudd in that mirror. So we gave that to the Mudd Foundation, and they have that hanging up in the house. I mean, we were absolutely ecstatic when we caught that. That was just, the resemblance is uncanny. But we caught a lot of EVPs there. These were the best pictures that we caught there that night. And if anybody has a group, they do let other groups come in and investigate. In fact, there was a documentary that was being filmed here, I think about 2 months ago. I'm not sure what channel it might air on or anything else, but there was somebody there working on that. I'm going to go to the next slide. The Edgar Allan Poe House in Baltimore. And I hope I'm correct in assuming everybody here knows who Edgar Allan Poe is. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, is another one that a lot of people associate with Baltimore. He died there in October of 1849. There's a lot of controversy. Some say he was drunk and died in the gutter. Others say that maybe he had rabies because of his actions at the time. You know, we're never going to know. The house was built in 1830, and it was actually considered the country at the time. If you go into it now, that's downtown Baltimore. There's nothing country about it now. But, you know, 160 years ago, 70 years ago it was. In 1949, it actually opened as a museum. It was saved from demolition. They were actually going to tear that down, and there was a group that got together in Baltimore and decided to save it. And this year actually is the 200th celebration of Edgar Allan Poe's birth. So there's a lot of things going on in Baltimore all year round that have to do with him. In fact, if anybody remembers, what was the show John Astin was on? Not the Munsters.
Oh, the Addams Family.
It was the Addams Family. He was actually born and raised in Baltimore, and he's doing a lot of things at the house, doing different readings and things like that. Now,
don't forget the Ravens was actually named because of
yes, the Ravens were named, and the Ravens mascots are Edgar Allan and Poe. And I misspelled Allen, and I realized that after I burned it to CD. But it's not Poe that haunts the house. It's a large, heavy-set woman. Nobody's quite sure who she is. His aunt owned the house, so there's some speculation on maybe it's his aunt. But people have heard voices, footsteps, doors and windows will just open randomly, cold spots, a lot of different activity. I mean, you can tell it's not a very big place at all. Unfortunately, the curator of the house doesn't let a whole lot of investigations go through. I know of two. Because he's afraid the mayor of Baltimore will think he believes in ghosts if he lets people come in to investigate. So I had a tip given to me that you don't email him and you don't call him. You actually go down and you talk to him face to face and you make him understand how great it is that if he lets you come in and you get evidence, and by him being able to say the place is haunted, that will bring in a whole lot more people. You know, New Orleans makes millions and millions of dollars a year on their supernatural trade. The next one is Fort McHenry in Baltimore. It was built in 1776 because of a fear of a British attack. For those of you that don't know, this is actually what the Star was written about. September 13th, 1814, the Brits were bombarding Baltimore. They did that for 25 hours. And Francis Scott Key was on a frigate called the Surprise and was watching the bombs come over. And when he woke up the next morning and saw that flag flying, that's when he went and wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. There's been a lot of different deaths there over the years. One of the casualties was a Lieutenant Levi Claggett, and he was a casualty of the bombing of 1814. There was a suicide in what they called the dungeon, which the basement, during the Civil War. Right now, they're not letting any investigations go on in it. We're working to try to change that. We're actually in talks and trying to be one of the first groups to get in there. So all of the reports are coming from the park rangers. People have experienced things on tours, but the main credible things are coming from the rangers themselves. They report footsteps. It'll be after hours. They're walking through, making sure there's, everybody's gone, and they're hearing footsteps in front of them, behind them, all over the place. Again, windows will open and close, doors will slam. They'll turn a light off and take 3 steps out of the room and the light will turn back on. They'll come back, turn it off again, and it turns on again. It's an amazing place even to visit during the daytime. It's some beautiful views and everything else, but we're hoping to try and change it where they'll start letting groups come in. The next place I'm going to talk about is in a town called Ellicott City, which is actually right outside of Baltimore. Ellicott City has a ton of places that are considered haunted. Their whole Main Street area, just about every building there has a story. They have a private residence called Lilliburn, which if you Google it, you'll find pictures and things on it. I don't cover it in my book. I don't feel like I should because somebody lives there, and I know I wouldn't want people just coming by my house and just taking random pictures because they think they're going to. But it's supposed to be one of the more haunted places in Ellicott City. And this place here, Graham's Attic, it's owned by the Jacksons. It's a bookstore, and right next door to it is a law office. It's been a couple different things. It's been a sewing shop. It's been obviously a home at one point. Mrs. Jackson, they kind of considered her the unofficial mayor of Ellicott City. She was the type of person, she would come into work in the morning, she'd walk up and down and say hi to all the different merchants. If she saw people walking down the street, she'd say, "Hi, how are you?" And one of the really unique things about her is she would mix her own perfume. She would take several perfumes she liked and mix them and create her own unique scent. But she would never tell anybody what she was mixing together. And usually the first place she would stop in the morning would be right next door to the law office. Now the way that the law office is set up is there's a front door and then kind of a little foyer and a second door. So when the attorney is sitting in his office, he can see the shadow of somebody coming through the first door on that second door. She passed away about 10 years ago. And there's still reports of her actually coming up to people in the bookstore and asking them if they need help and pointing out a book, and then they'll go up and say, who was the nice lady that helped us? And Mr. Jackson just kind of looks at him and goes, I'm the only one here. Reports of her smell of that particular scent. The attorney himself has actually reported on several occasions where he's heard a door open and he'll look up to see who's coming in. And for, 25 years of seeing Mrs. Jackson come through, he recognized her shadow and would see her shadow and would go out there and there'd be nobody there. They have a fantastic ghost tour that they do. And many of the buildings will let different people come in to investigate. Some are bars, some are stores. It's actually a very, ghost hunting friendly town. The next one is back in the Fells Point area of Baltimore. The saloon is called The Horse You Came In On. It is actually believed to be the oldest saloon in the United States. It opened up in 1775. And this is actually the one big place in Baltimore where they say Edgar Allan Poe hangs out, that people have seen him having a drink at a table or seen him walking through the halls. So if you're looking to find Edgar Allan Poe, that's probably going to be your best bet. The place was actually auctioned off about 3 years ago. It is still open. And a lot of these places in Fells Point will let you come in and investigate. It's usually on like a Monday night or a Sunday night. Monday nights, a lot of times they may not be open or their hours are shorter. So if you don't mind a late night through the weeknight, a lot of the bars in Fells Point, because that's mainly what's there now, will let you come in. The next place is in an area called St. Michael's, which is actually on Maryland's eastern shore. It's garnered a little bit of fame here over the last couple years. At one point, Michael Jackson had been looking to buy property over there. Oprah Winfrey had been. Donald Rumsfeld actually does own a big house on the water over there. It's about 20-30 minutes from the Bay Bridge once you cross over. It's an absolute gorgeous town. Again, another one that has a lot of haunts. The Kemp House, it was built in 1805 for a man named Colonel Joseph Kemp, who had served in the Revolutionary War and had been a hero. He had also been in the War of 1812 and actively participated in the Battle of St. Michael's. He had a cavalry patrol along San Domingo Creek. Several years later, General Lee actually spent 2 nights there. The owners at that time were Mr. and Mrs. Oliver Sparks. So it has quite a bit of military history to it. It's a bed and breakfast now, so it is some place that you can go and stay the night. And a lot of bed and breakfasts in Maryland as well as up in Gettysburg, if you go in and say, look, how many rooms do you have, and you have enough team members to rent out the place, they'll let you come in and investigate and stay up all night. They're fine with it. Some of the reports there, employees have seen a blue flash just kind of streak up the stairway. There's the blue room on the second floor, which has had a lot of unusual activity. In one case, there was a couple that was staying there, and the wife woke up in the middle of the night, and she just had this feeling of being watched. And she looked over, and in the corner was a rocking chair, and it was actually rocking back and forth. Another instance was a father and son that were staying there, and there was a double bed and then a trundle bed, and the father slept in the big bed and put the son on the trundle bed. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by what he felt like somebody actually getting in bed with him. He felt the bed depress and thought it was his son, and he looked over, and his son was in the trundle bed. Needless to say, they didn't finish the night there. Kind of got up and left. Some of the other reports is doors slamming a lot when the employees are working and there's nobody there and they're all down on the main floor. They'll hear doors slamming like crazy upstairs. The next one goes back to Ellicott City. This is the Patapsco Female Institute. And it was actually a girls' finishing school that opened in 1839. And you can see it's in ruins. It's not complete anymore. This is a place that is open for investigations. They will let you come up and investigate it. I believe I think it might be $10 or $15 a person. It's fairly inexpensive, and it's actually going towards the upkeep of what remains there. It's a young girl that actually haunts the place by the name of Annie van der Lot, and she was the daughter of a rich Southern planter. And they had sent her up here for boarding school. She hated it. She hated Baltimore. She hated Ellicott City. She hated everything about it. In many of her letters home, she referred to it as her incarceration, and that she wanted to come back down south. Well, before her parents could come up and get her, she actually contracted pneumonia and ended up dying in the school from it. There's been a young girl in a long white dress coming through this doorway here and down the stone steps, and then coming out onto the lawn and then disappearing. I got the chance to investigate there. I didn't really catch anything, but I haven't had the opportunity to go back, and it's not like ghosts appear when we want them to. But it's a pretty impressive place. It sits up on a hill, and it's got an absolute beautiful view to it. The next place is Point Lookout Lighthouse, and it's in a town called Scotland, Maryland, and that's where the Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac River meet. I do a lot of volunteer work down there. I've been in this lighthouse 3, 4, 5 dozen times now. I've completely lost count. I know it doesn't look like your typical, tall, thin lighthouse. It's actually a duplex. They would have 2 families in there, and then the light sits on top. It was built in 1830, and it was last remodeled in 1927 to make it how it is now. It was actually decommissioned in 1966. The Coast Guard eventually transferred it over to the Navy, and then the Navy went ahead and gave it to the state of Maryland. It sits on Point Lookout Park. Up through the 70s and 80s, they would actually allow civilians to live in the house. In fact, one of the civilians was one of the ones that helped create the Point Lookout Preservation Society. There's a lot of hauntings here. When people, if you say what's the most haunted lighthouse in America, a lot of people will say St. Augustine because that's what they hear about. If you look it up on the internet, it'll tell you Point Lookout is. We have so many different types of apparitions that have been seen there. There's been Indians in the basement. There's been shipwrecks out on the bay where survivors actually had crawled up to the porch and died. So there have been apparitions of I don't want to call them shipwreck survivors because they're dead now, but victims of shipwrecks, I guess is a good way to put it. There was a Civil War hospital just a few feet from the lighthouse, and in fact, the entire park was a Civil War POW camp. It was the northern version of Andersonville. There was a lot of atrocities that happened there. And before the lighthouse was there, before the hospital was there, it was actually a private plantation. There are numerous ghost stories throughout the whole park. One, in fact, on the Potomac side, there has been reports of a lady in white floating over the Potomac. And what it's believed is that her family was the one that actually had the plantation there in the 1700s. And that would have been, from what they've been able to surmise from land records, where they possibly could have put the family burial. I mean, they didn't have big cemeteries like they do now. Well, of course, over years and years and years of erosion, we don't have the beachfront like we used to. So by her floating over the Potomac, and maybe during her time, that would have been land, and that she's looking for those graves. In order to get to the lighthouse, you have to drive over 2 causeways. There's been numerous reports, and I've actually experienced it myself. When you go across the one causeway, either in front of you, or in my case, it was in my rearview mirror, you'll see something run in front of your car. It's a Civil War soldier. And there have been numerous reports, because this is actually, if you call 911 from the lighthouse, you're going to get Virginia, not Maryland. That's how close it is to Virginia. That a lot of them would try and escape and try to get across the Potomac back into southern land. It's not a deer. Like I said, I've seen it in my rearview mirror, and I know what plenty of deer look like. It wasn't a deer, even though we have deer in the park. Like I said, we've had a ton of apparitions there. You can hear footsteps. I had an experience a couple years ago. Every year, right before Halloween, we do this great big haunted house to try to raise money towards the restoration. We have a bad problem with break-ins. We had somebody come in and steal all our crystal doorknobs. I mean, it's horrible, the break-ins we get down there. But we stay the night there because we have all kinds of fun equipment and everything else. And we had one person staying up on the top floor by himself, and then there was 3 of us in one of the living rooms. And we had an air mattress with 2 of us, and then a cot with somebody else. And it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's no curtains. So when the sun comes up, I'm awake. And I was fully awake because there's no working plumbing in there. We had a little porta potty for the weekend, but normally you have to walk about a quarter mile to the bathroom house. And I was actually laying there on whether or not, how bad I really wanted to get up and go to the bathroom because it had been raining. And I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, like a man with boots coming down. And I thought maybe it was the guy that had been sleeping upstairs. Because I rolled over to say good morning, and when I rolled over, there was nobody there. But the footsteps finished coming down the stairs and then walked right between the air mattress and the cot. The person next to me on the air mattress, she was still asleep because I was elbowing her. I'm like, you need to get up here. The person on the cot heard it too. In fact, it was a 15-year-old boy. It was the son of the guy upstairs because he actually had the sleeping bag up over his head and just kind of very quietly said, I heard it too. This past year, we were there, it was another Halloween event, and it had been the 2 of us and my son that were staying there. And again, 6 o'clock in the morning, sun comes up, I'm up. They were still sleeping. I went and crawled up in the cupola with a digital recorder just to see if I could get anything, and I got a very evil sounding, get out of my house. Now, I'm down there quite a bit, so the next time I went down, I crawled back up in the cupola and said, no, I'm alive, this is my house. So I have an EVP for you. It's not one of the ones that I recorded. It's one that somebody else recorded. Let me see if you guys can hear it. You hear the woman singing?
Yeah. This way.
There you go.
Let's try it.
No, we have heard a woman humming. I've never heard a woman singing, but I have heard a woman humming with my own ears while sitting in there. Even different groups can come in to investigate it. There's a website, and I have information at my table, which is all the way in the back if anybody's interested. It's pllps.org. We host what we call paranormal nights about 14 to 16 times a year. I volunteer for about half of those, where people can come in from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and do their own investigation. And it's $50 a person, or an entire group can just rent it out for $500 for the night. We try to limit it to 10 people. If a group's coming in, they can have up to 15, but it's hardwood floors, sound carry, so we try to keep it small. And we don't do it in the summer because, like I said, it is a park and people are out there fishing. So we do it from like February to early May, and then we'll start up again in September and go into November. December and January, it's too cold. There's absolutely no heat. There's no air conditioning in this place. It gets pretty frigid sometimes. But we have a lot of groups that have come in. In fact, one of the vendors out there Her name's Beth. She's been there. Her and the person that's with her have been there, and it's a great place. And I've got some neat pictures for you. The next one is not one that I took. This one's actually a couple of years old, and it's on it's ptlookoutlighthouse.com. That has a lot of EVPs and pictures and things like that. This is actually upstairs on the south side, which would be the side facing the Potomac River. I have heard this chain here be pulled. Now, there's no light bulb in there. Well, there is now, but I mean, there's no working electricity to it or anything else. But we've sat in there and heard it pull. Somebody caught that. Now, to me, that could be a head. I mean, I kind of know the dimension than anybody else here would, but, that almost looks like a head going down to shoulders to me. We have actually another EVP on that. Let's see here. It's that whispered voice that's going, lost, lost. The next picture is another one that's also on the internet. A few years ago, we had some painting and stuff going on the outside of the lighthouse. And you can see in this top window, of course, they've blown it up here on the inside. It looks like a lamp. There's no electrical outlet there. And in order to reach that window, it's on a stairwell. Jim, who's 6'4", would need a ladder to get to that. We don't have anything like that in the lighthouse. I mean, it's pretty open. We've got a few chairs and tables. We do an open house the first weekend of every month from the spring to the fall, so people can sit there. But and like I said, we get break-ins all the time, so if we had anything, it'd get stolen. It's some sort of ghostly lamp, which I thought was really kind of interesting. You don't see too many pictures of inanimate objects caught on photos. These actually were caught by a teammate of ours.
Jim Gray.
When was it? Was that?
It was in March.
March. This again is upstairs, and this isn't somebody's finger. This isn't somebody covering a flash. The pictures are actually taken by a guy that is
taken like this.
But he's an independent filmmaker. So if anybody knows how to work a camera, it's him. The next couple slides are actually a series of this black mass that was forming upstairs. Unfortunately, I was having problems with somebody, yet again, that was waiting for us to leave so they could break in and was downstairs trying to get a hold of rangers to get them out there and everything else. So I didn't get to run around upstairs with these guys. But Jim was there and a couple of the other members of the teams were there. But, I mean, you can just kind of see how dark, it gets to the point that it's blocking out the door in the back. I think the next slide even shows it even better. And at times, you can almost make a human shape out of it, like maybe the start of some heads and some shoulders. I think, is it the next one that's Nikki? Yeah, it's completely blocked Nikki out. Nikki is maybe from Jim to I. There's no reason why he can't get a decent picture from her. And then all of a sudden it started to back off. It actually came down the hallway. I have a friend that lives in North Carolina that is a psychic, and I never tell her I'm at the lighthouse. She only seems to know that I'm there because she'll call me. I had an incident a couple years ago where it was a group of state troopers that came in to investigate it, and they're young cops. We're big bad cops. We can handle anything. And I was sitting downstairs in the kitchen, and all of a sudden one just blew out of the kitchen outside. And my first thought was, I wonder if he saw something in the park and was going to, go take care of it. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, I've locked us in. I'm the only one that has the key to the gate, or the code to the gate. And then everybody else in his team kind of came out, and a couple of their wives were with them. And I said, what happened? Well, there was a room in the back that apparently he had seen a light in the middle of the room just kind of light up and go away. And everybody else apparently had been having bad feelings about that room, and nobody would go in. So that's why he went. He's like, I'll go in. I'm not afraid of anything. There's nothing here. Well, he saw it, and he said, if that's you, do it again. And it happened again. And it scared him so bad, he ran out, sat in his truck, and was crying. I try telling him there's nothing in the lighthouse that's going to hurt. I mean, you know, I've gotten get-outs and things like that, but there's nothing threatening in the lighthouse, and nobody's really ever been hurt. But he was a little freaked out. This here is that room. But a few seconds later, I got a phone call from my friend, and she said, "What happened at the lighthouse?" I'm like, how do you know I'm at the lighthouse? And I told her, I said, somebody got kind of spooked out, and she said, "Is it the brown room in the back?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Do you remember when I was there and I picked up on the gay ghost?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, tell him it was flirting with him." And I'm like, I don't know if that's going to make him feel better or not. But, okay, so I kind of told her, I said, "Well, apparently the ghost liked you and it was flirting with you." I didn't tell him it was a gay ghost. I figured, well, but kind of the same thing. She called me, and the guy that's taking the pictures, she said, "There's something in the house that likes him." And I asked, I said, "Well, is it the gay ghost?" And she said, "No, it was a woman." And that she, when he was trying to get pictures that where it looked like, you know, just like that top corner there, she was actually going around him. I don't know if it's true or not, but he kind of thinks it's neat that, you know, there's a girl ghost that's got a crush on him. So, Ram's Head Tavern in Annapolis, my hometown. Annapolis has a lot of history, has a lot of haunts. Ram's Head was actually, the building originates to 1703, and it was owned by St. Anne's Parish, which St. Anne's will actually be in another slide here in a minute. It was leased to William Reynolds, and he also had Reynolds Tavern, which will be up here in a minute. And then it was subleased to Samuel Chase in 1769. Samuel Chase was one of the signers of the Constitution. In 1794, the tavern or pub that was there was called Sign of the Green Tree. And there was a young girl by the name of Amy. Amy was about 13, 14 years old, and to be politically correct, we'll call her a working girl. I know that, of course, this day and age, that is extremely young, but you figure back in those, 13, 14, they were getting married and having babies and everything else. She ended up going up to her room with a sailor. The sailor ended up impaling her on a bedpost. And in fact, if you go into the bar in the basement and you ask the bartender, he will let you step behind the bar and you can see part of the bedpost still embedded in the ceiling of the basement. Obviously, they cut the top part off because that whole top floor is a bar and is actually a small concert hall. There is a room, like a storage closet kind of thing, back behind that particular bar that the name Amy is scrawled in kind of like big little kid writing. I mean, you figure she probably never went to school. It looks like it was done with a fingernail. We don't know if she put it there or if when it was replastered, somebody hearing the story put it there. But she's been seen to walk and disappear into walls and things like that. The next one is actually Reynolds Tavern. It is Mrs. Reynolds, Mary Reynolds, that haunts the place. Now, a neat little story about Reynolds Tavern. It was built in 1747, and it was home to William and Mary. And when they first opened up the tavern back in the 1750s, 1760s, there was a young man by the name of George Washington that would frequent it. And there's a couple places in Annapolis. I mean, that's where he resigned his commission. I mean, he had a lot of ties to Annapolis. But Mr. George Washington kind of took a liking to Mary Reynolds, even though she was married. And William caught him flirting with her. And there's stories, actually published newspaper stories, of him chasing George Washington through the streets of Annapolis trying to kill him because he was flirting with Mary Reynolds. William died in 1777, and it was left to Mary. She later died in the home in 1785. Some of the things that have been reported there, when they went to do some major construction on it or remodeling a few years ago, there was a drill that somebody left laying there. It wasn't plugged in or anything, that just started going by itself. The owners were looking, had a big rug catalog, and were trying to decide for the rugs for the different rooms. It's actually a bed and breakfast and restaurant now. And the book disappeared for 3 days and then randomly turned up in some random closet nobody's been in like 3 years. The cook in the kitchen has, on several occasions, and it's mainly crab soup, either vegetable crab soup or cream of crab soup, has had big pots of it sitting there to cool, and it'll just get knocked right over. She's been seen on the stairwell. She's been seen in some of the rooms. There's been unexplained breezes when the windows have been closed, cold spots, things like that. She's more of a mischievous ghost. And I think it's probably one of those things. This was her home, her dream home. She didn't want to leave. She's still there. And I think maybe when they were doing the remodeling, understandably, they're changing her house, getting a little upset. But some of the other things is just kind of a little bit of being a playful ghost, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. Maryland has its share of abandoned insane asylums. This one, actually, Rosewood State Hospital in Owings Mills is in the process of being torn down. I was very fortunate in the fact that there's been one particular group of ghost hunters in the state that somebody worked for the state and actually had a key, and we were the only really sanctioned people to be able to go in and investigate. Unfortunately, there's a lot of kids. Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of buildings burned down because kids have gotten in there. And when you walk in, there's still clothes on the floor. When we found old patient files, payroll records, it literally was just like they created a big mess and left. And kids getting up there playing and all that stuff just went up. And since it's been scheduled for demolition anyways, they've just let the building turn into a controlled burn. It was established in 1888, and the name of it at the time was the Asylum and Training School for the Feeble-Minded. It was renamed to Rosewood State Hospital in 1961. There's been a lot of weird shadows, voices, noises. When we were in there, we would walk through the building to make sure, number one, that there were no kids in there. And we would find a place to sit, and we would hear doors slamming. We would hear voices. There was one particular gentleman that would go with us on these investigations that has a very severe stutter to the point that when he's not stuttering, he still has kind of a speech impediment. And they seemed to respond more to him, which we thought was very interesting. And he would ask them various questions, and we would get knocks in reply. We would get a lot of different EVPs and things like that. Going back to Annapolis, this is St. Anne's Episcopal Church. If you ever go to Annapolis or have ever been there is Church Circle and there is State Circle. And this is the church that sits in Church Circle. The streets all around it are brick. There is a small graveyard right there within the church grounds, but every time they go to re-brick those streets and they start digging, they find more bodies. St. Anne's also has a larger cemetery in another part of town, but obviously when they outgrew what's around there. The gentleman that is seen around here is a man by the name of Joe Simmons, and he was a sexton for the church for over 70 years. He died in 1836 at the age of 100, which was, it's old now, but it was really old back then. He got the name of the nickname Joe Moore because he was actually the grave digger for the church. And it's said that he would dig up and rebury coffins just for fun. That doesn't sound a whole lot of fun to me, but that's what he did. They don't say if he buried him in the same spot or if he moved him around. Maybe that's what the fun part was, his own little private joke. He was very grumpy and had an odd personality and was not very well liked. And the children of the time would tease him and throw things at him, and he would threaten to get them and all of that. But one of the stories surrounding him is there was a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Jigg that he buried. And of course, back then they didn't have the embalming techniques, and there was a lot of people being buried alive. Well, as he's throwing dirt on the coffin, there are sounds coming from the coffin, and he just kept throwing dirt on them. And it took several townspeople to make him stop so that they could get Jeffrey Jigg out. And he's quoted to saying, well, he has to die sometime, and if he's not dead now, he ought to be. So, that kind of gives you an insight into his personality. He has been seen in the graveyard, actually digging. He's been seen walking. He's actually been seen in the church, sitting in the pew that he sat at for 70 years. We're going to head back over to the Eastern Shore to an area called Snow Hill. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of or been to Ocean City, Maryland. This is kind of in between the town of Salisbury and Ocean City. Snow Hill actually has a lot of neat stories to it. This home was built about 1835, and it has served as a private home, the town post office, the home of the town doctor, an apartment building, and now it's a bed and breakfast. Dr. John S., I think I'm pronouncing this right, Adelante, actually lived and ran the medical practice out of the home in the 1870s and served as the town doctor into the 20th century. He died in the house in 1929, and he's buried at Whatcoat Cemetery a few blocks away. He, however, is not the one that they believe haunts the place. He had a son by the name of William James, and William James committed suicide while he was at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacology in Baltimore. The reports at the time stated that he cut his own throat several times. The main story is apparently he was not doing well in school and did not want to be a failure in his father's eyes. There have been other stories that have said that he was involved with a woman that his father didn't think that he should be involved with, and that's why he took his life. There's been a lot of disputed stories. However, in a note dated December 14th, 1904, he wrote, "Dear Papa, it is useless to keep me at school." That next morning, the woman who was the keeper of the boarding house that he lived in there in Baltimore ran upstairs because she had heard what sounded like someone falling over and some deep groans, and she ran and opened the door and she found him. The Baltimore Sun actually ran an article the next day, and the article was quoted as saying that hurrying upstairs, she opened the door and beheld the young man rolling on the floor groaning, and the blood flowing from several gashes across his throat. From the appearance of the room, Mr. Adelet had evidently cut his throat while standing in front of the bureau. He is then believed to have walked to his bed and cut his throat twice again. It says a lot, because I mean, I can't think of cutting my own throat, but, to do it several times. But the spirit in the house, they call him JJ. And there's been an apparition of a young man that roams the halls. He'll lock doors, open windows, turn lights off and on, has set off the fire alarms. He appears in mirrors. People, sleeping guests, have actually awakened to their bed being shaked. They've had candles that have for no reason gone out. And the fireplaces have just come on, gas fireplaces being lit for no reason. Is nothing threatening, but he apparently likes to play tricks. Again, it's a bed and breakfast, so it's someplace where, if you want to go and rent and ask for a particular room or want to be able to rent it out, they'll let you come in. The next stop is Spring Grove State Hospital in Catonsville, which is actually where we live. This is yet another insane asylum. The original hospital was founded in 1797, making it the nation's second oldest psych hospital. The oldest is actually out of Williamsburg, Virginia. It used to be downtown, but they moved it out to Catonsville, which is about 8 miles from downtown Baltimore. The design of it is called the Kirkbride Plan. If anybody's familiar with Waverly Hills, it looks like a very small version, or not a very small, but a smaller version of Waverly Hills, that kind of design to it. Construction began in 1853, and the old building, Foster Wade, was actually in use until 1981. There are some buildings that are still used. Most of them are more modern, and they have a lot of people with maybe chemical dependency type problems. They have some adolescents, I believe, there.
Geriatric unit.
They have a geriatric unit. My grandmother was actually a nurse in training in here in the 1920s. Both of Jim's parents worked there. It's a very neat place to go to. It's humongous. They have this huge ball field there, and most people say, okay, it's a ball field. Well, back in the 1800s and early 20th century, if you had somebody you dropped off at an insane asylum, chances are that was it. You were never going to see him for the rest of your life. And they would drop off children with Down syndrome, things that we would look at now and be absolutely appalled with. They didn't know what to do with them. They dropped them off. Well, when these people would die, nobody would come to claim the bodies. So what they did with the ball field is they would actually roll back the sod, bury the bodies there, put the sod back on, and they would be playing baseball on it that afternoon. It's really a huge mass grave. I've caught EVPs there. In fact, my very first time ever stepping foot on it, I turned on my recorder and I got something calling my name out, called Re-out. And it was kind of an angry Re, too. It kind of bothered me at first. If I've had my name called out at the lighthouse, that's fine. I'm glad they know who I am. But, I'm kind of thinking, okay, what are these crazy people thinking now? But you can sit actually on the ball field and see unexplained shadows, humanist shadows moving around. We've caught a number of EVPs. The buildings, especially Foster Wade, they will not let you. I do know of somebody that has been in the Foster Wade, and it's Not anything I would ever sanction because they did not get in there legally. But they actually had things happen where they were in the basement and heard what sounded like a body being dragged in the hallway. And they took a picture, and in all the dust and silt, there's actually what looks like drag marks going through. They also got a picture of a rat that I swear is this big from head to tail. It's the biggest rat I've ever seen in my life. If anybody has ever seen the movie Silence of the Lambs, in the beginning where Clarice first meets Dr. Hannibal Lecter and she's walking down the Hall of Cells, that was actually in the basement of the Foster Way building. It's an incredible place. As far as ghost hunting goes, what we have learned is if you go down while it's still daylight and park somewhere and are walking around and then stay after it gets dark, it's actual police force, it's not security. I mean, there are armed police that are there. They'll pretty much leave you alone because they've already seen you. You know, they see you taking pictures or doing whatever, they'll leave you alone. If you go in after dark, they'll pull right up on you and tell you to get out. So it's kind of one of those things, okay, well, you know, you're here during the day, you're letting us see you, we know you're not up to something. They'll pay a little more attention to some of the old buildings to make sure nobody's trying to break in. But as far as the grounds themselves, they're usually pretty good about letting you stay on. Heading back to Annapolis, we have the State House. This is actually the oldest continuously used state house in the country. This is where George Washington resigned his commission. It was the capital of the United States for a short time. The story behind this is in February 23rd of 1793, there was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Dance who was actually plastering the inside of the dome. And it's believed he was reaching for a tool and lost his footing, but he fell. And he fell several hundred feet all the way to the bottom. The strange thing about it is nobody reported hearing him scream or cry out. They heard a thump and found him. After his death, his wife and kids were sent back to England, and they were not given the wages that he would have earned up to that point. So they believe that the reason why he still hangs around here is because of the injustice of that. Here his family's in poverty, and now they're being sent back to England, and there's no clear reason in anything I've ever researched on saying why they sent him back or sent them back. He has been seen this little walkway here. There's been reports of people being on tours asking, how did that person get out there? And they're like, well, you can't get out there. There's no way to get out there. They've seen him around there. I actually, my quote-unquote real job or daytime job, I work with somebody that used to be a docent for the tours there. And she saw a man in colonial garb looking out of a window. And she knew all of the other docents, and she thought it was maybe somebody, a docent from another place, and went over to tell him, you're not supposed to be in this room, you need to get out. And as she walked over, he disappeared. Needless to say, she no longer volunteered her time there. She also does the Lighthouse Challenge that is in Maryland every year, and she will not go to Point Lookout. She'll go to it, but she won't go in the lighthouse. She will have whoever the friend is that goes with her go into the lighthouse to get their little stamp on their passport so they can get their prize at the end. The next place is Surratt's Tavern in Clinton, which is another suburb of Washington, D.C. Mary Surratt was the first female hung by the United States government for her role in John Wilkes Booth's assassination plan. The house was built in 1852. It served as a tavern, a hostelry, a post office, and a polling place. And during the Civil War, it was actually a safe house for Confederate underground. If you don't know, Maryland was a border state. If gone to the South, the war may have been very different. Maryland was very, very closely watched during that time. But it was a border state, so we had Southern sympathizers, and of course we had a lot of Union soldiers. Mary and John Surratt owned this. He died suddenly in 1862. They say it's possibly a heart attack or some sort of hemorrhage that he might have had. She was hung July 7th of 1865. And what actually sealed her fate is there was a tenant of the house by the name of John Milloyd. And when he got on the stand to testify, he had said that she had requested that field glasses and carbines be ready for Booth when he arrived at the house after the planned assassination. And that's what sealed her fate. she is believed to haunt the place. There's been reports of cold spots, breezes, sounds. Now, there's been sounds in what would have been the tavern part where it sounds like multiple voices. So it sounds like she's not the only one there. They are a little leery with ghost hunting. They will let some groups in, some they won't. They really won't talk about the ghosts a whole lot. It depends on who you get a hold of. I know of a couple people that have been able to get in and do investigations, but I've had others where they've told them flat out no. So I think it depends on who you ask and maybe what their mood is at the time. The next one, going back to Baltimore's Inner Harbor, is the USS Constellation. This is actually, I guess you would consider the second USS Constellation. The first one went out in 1799. Parts of that were used to rebuild and refit the ship, which that happened several times in 1854. It was actually the last all-sail warship. It served in 5 wars, including the Civil War and World War II. It sailed against the French, it battled pirates, and it battled slave traders. So it saw a lot of different types of action. There's several different ghosts, and this one does actually allow people to come on. They do daytime tours, but you can come ghost hunts. In 1799, there was a yeoman by the name of Neil Harvey that they termed him a sleepy sailor. He was known for falling asleep. Well, Captain Thomas Truxton decided he was going to make an example out of him and tied him to the cannon and fired the cannon and blew him to smithereens. So he is supposed to be one of them on the ship, and he's supposed to be the one that most people feel uncomfortable when he's around. He's obviously very angry. He's never hurt anybody or threatened anybody, but you just kind of get an uncomfortable feeling. Captain Truxton is also supposed to be on the ship. Several years ago, somebody caught a picture of a man in gold epaulets, bending over slightly, reaching across his waist like he was drawing his sword. They believe that would have been the captain at the time. Another one is Carl Hansen, and he's a little more modern. He was the night watchman up through the mid-20th century. He worked until 1963 when they installed an alarm system, and he's actually been seen in the lower deck playing cards and just kind of making his rounds. Kind of seems a little odd because, he didn't die on the boat, but it sounds like the boat was something very, very close to him, very personal to him. Also in Baltimore is the Westminster Burying Ground. You may not be quite familiar with that, but I bet probably all of you have heard about what's called the Poe Toaster, which is the gentleman every year on January 19th that appears cloaked, that leaves a bottle of cognac and a single rose on the grave of Edgar Allan Poe. This is that location. The graveyard was established in 1786 by the First Presbyterian Church. It's kind of a who's who of early Baltimore. A lot of different people that political figures and war heroes were buried there. Poe was buried there in 1849, and this is actually a picture of the door to the catacombs that's underneath the church. If anybody remembers the show Sightings that was on Fox back in the early 90s, they did an episode that actually covered homes as well as Point Lookout. A lot of EVPs, a lot of activity. This is a place you can investigate. They will let you come in and investigate after hours. It's also very popular on around midnight of January 19th, to the point where they'll sell tickets for the best viewing spots for people to be able to see who this cloaked figure that has been coming in for, gosh, it's had to have been over 100 years now, that comes in. Nobody's ever tried to catch them. And people talk about it, but I think that would ruin the whole mystique. Obviously, at this point, it's not one person that's been doing this, so, it must be maybe a family secret that keeps getting passed down, but it's something that, Baltimore's very proud of, and we cover it every year. And if you go to the next picture, it'll actually show you the monument for where Edgar Allan Poe is buried. Now, he was originally buried in the back of the church, or back of the graveyard, and it was in the 20th century that they went ahead and moved him up front and put this great big monument to him because of the notoriety and the contributions that he's given to Baltimore. The Wharf Rat, yet another bar in Fells Point. I keep telling everybody that when my book comes out, we're just going to have to do a pub crawl because that's mainly what is haunted in Maryland, apparently, are the bars. We've got Fells Point, Ellicott City, and Annapolis. The Wharf Rat is actually kind of a museum as well. It has maritime artifacts and different nautical memorabilia. The fireplace is so big that somebody gym-size could stand inside of it. It is huge. It is said to be haunted by John Rakowski, who is the former owner of Buck Gardens, which is what sat on that spot before the building was erected. The building is fairly new for Fells Point. This is not an 18th century building. This is more of a 19th century building. He's been seen wandering through the bar, wandering around upstairs, cold spots, glasses falling off the bar, bottles of liquor just kind of being smashed. So he kind of makes his presence known a little bit. I know we're running out of time here, so the last place I'm going to talk about is the Zodiac Restaurant in Baltimore, and actually, unfortunately, the restaurant just closed here not too long ago. So I'm anxious to see if they reopen it again as a restaurant, and if they'll let people come in and to do investigations. Employees have reported seeing a man dressed in old-style linen suit sitting at table 3, and waiters have actually gone up to offer him a menu, and he just disappears in front of their eyes. During Prohibition, it was actually a speakeasy, and it was run by a man by the name of McKim, and the story behind is that he actually hung himself in the basement after his wife left him. And this next picture was not one of the groups I'm affiliated. It was with another group that actually got this picture on their thermal camera. And they've hypothesized that might possibly be Mr. Kim that they caught going down the stairs. And that's it. To find out more about me, I am all over the internet. I'm on Facebook. I'm on MySpace. I have my own webpage. The two groups that I'm involved with, Prismed, which is based out of Baltimore, we have a webpage. I'm also affiliated with Eastern Paranormal Research, which is based out of Southern Maryland. We have a webpage. I have all kinds of flyers and things back at my table that has all the information and how to find me and everything else. So, if you want to learn more about Maryland or just want to stop by and say hi, I'll be back there. So, I thank you guys for your time, and I hope I've maybe want you to come visit Maryland.